Hi, welcome back to the SEVN-x Files. I'm your host, Matt Barnett, and today we're in New Orleans. I got a special guest today, Keith Pachulski. We're going to chat about physical security testing, so this is going to be a fun one. So we're down here in New Orleans. I'm chatting with Keith Pachulski, cybersecurity expert, physical security guru. Thank you for taking a few minutes to sit down, grab a bourbon with us, and chat about physical security.
Yeah.
So, we do these physical security engagements all the time, right? Company hires us, say, hey, can you break into our facility? And if you can, why do we do these? Like, why do you think customers are asking for this type of an engagement?
So I think it's split for a couple of different reasons. I think part of it is we're so focused on the cyber side of it, there isn't much thought put into the physical side of it. So I think it's kind of not taken or not fully understood the impacts for not really assessing the physical security programs for a lot of customers. So they consider it an afterthought. It's kind of pulled in as we'll see what happens with this. So without really anticipating how much damage can actually be done if someone were to actually physically walk into a facility or into their office space or whatever the target may be. So I think at first it's more of an afterthought, but after we do a lot of these assessments and they actually see the potential impacts to the business operations, that it really clicks in their head that there's significant risk here that they're ignoring, which has really changed over the past couple of years. Where there's been more physical interactions as opposed to going over the network.
Right. Yeah, and I think we see that too with our, we call it the success rate, right? An external penetration test versus an internal penetration test. I mean, you definitely see more findings on an internal, right, than you do on an external. So I think that illustrates your point, right? Where if you can have physical access to the building, it then becomes an internal engagement, right? And the success rate and the damage rate quotient goes up pretty significantly if you're on site versus trying to come in from the internet.
Right. So and it kind of goes back to the insider threat. I mean, this was a big thing, and then it kind of vanished. I mean, insider threat simulations, emulations, whatever the word is, but the insider threat attack. The DoD put a lot of focus on this probably like 10 years ago. They released a nice 185-page document on insider threat assessments and insider threat attacks. So it became a really hot topic, and then it just kind of fell off out of interest.
Why is that? Because we just didn't see as much as we thought we would, or
honestly, I hate to say it, I blame salespeople. It's not a sexy sell. I mean, it's easier to sell us sitting there in our little black hoodies and in front of the matrix. I mean, it's easier to sell the cyber piece of it than it is the physical piece. So I mean, obviously, we get physical access to a building, it's game over. I mean, everyone knows that. And our success rate of getting in the building is almost 100%. I shouldn't say, but there's very few facilities that you guys have been to, that I've been to, where we don't get access to the building.
Right.
Whether it's through social engineering or it's just poor physical access controls, but we always get in.
Right.
But it's a hard sell because you're selling to a different crowd then. You're not selling to the security, the IT security guy or the CISO. You're selling to physical security directors who really don't see the value, or they don't see the value, but they don't understand the implications and don't want to deal with the fallout of a physical security breach. It's something that the physical security, testing physical security breaches. I'm going back. I'm thinking of some other people I've talked to about this. I did a lot of work with some of the personal protection specialists where they don't really, they build their physical security programs based on as-is or DoD standards, and it's just kind of assumed that if they follow those standards, it's going to be 100% secure, and there's never any testing done from the physical security guys because it is such a niche market. I mean, the number of companies that actually do physical security testing well is incredibly small. You're talking less than probably 20 companies in the United States that do it very well.
True.
So
that's a good point. I mean, the other thing is, how do we, we do these and then we say you're good or you're not good, or here's the things you can fix, here's what you can do to enhance your security, but we don't take it as far as a criminal actor might, right? We as hired companies don't break windows, we don't destroy property, we don't cause physical destruction. You know, I guess is the argument from the physical security guys that you know, don't put a lot of faith in these types of engagements. Is their argument just that, you know, well, if I really wanted in, I would just break in, or like, what's the?
No, I go back to DoD stuff a lot. I mean, and everyone has their standard they try to measure it to. I mean, DoD did a great job with a lot of the documentation on not only physical security program development, but also in testing. So they kind of tiered off to, you know, low risk attacks, which is kind of stuff that we do because most companies that hire us don't want you throwing a brick through the freaking window. But even then, it's still considered a low risk attack. You know, low risk is either no tools or small handheld tools, and a brick is it's a small handheld tool. But it's hard to go into the more sophisticated, you know, high risk attacks where they're coming in with, you know, plasma cutters and shit. Excuse me.
Right. No.
So I mean, it's kind of that's where, because it is still such a new area of testing. All of our testing is really focused on those low-risk attacks, you know, the stealthy attacks. You know, can you clone badges? Can you pick a lock? Can you shim a lock? Can you bypass egress controllers? I mean, it's still really all focusing on just that scratching the surface of the physical security program, where if we're identifying gaps in a low-risk program, you got serious issues if you're falling into a higher classification facility. If you're actually dealing with, you know, what they call moderate or high risk areas, and you're failing a low risk assessment, which is most of the stuff that we do, you know, that really points back to the physical security program is a complete failure.
Right. Do you see buildings nowadays, right? Like, what do you think the most common flaw is? Something that you see just time and time again, or what are a couple of the things that you see constantly at almost every client these days?
I mean, the common ones are really going to be like the egress controllers. I mean, we see that everywhere. Honestly, it is such and it is a lack of understanding for the building designers, because they don't understand the implications of, you know, where to put the egress controllers, that the egress controllers shouldn't be mounted on the door. I mean, that's a big one. I mean, the other one that we see all the time is, you know, crappy locks. You're using residential grade locks that are, you know, not bump or pick resistant, air quotes there, but they're going with these locks that have like less than a 60-second protection rate. So I mean, these are like the huge ones. The other one is like the strike plate covers. We see those all the time where the locks aren't properly installed, the bolts are exposed and easy to manipulate. So you're talking less than a minute most times to get into a lot of these facilities. But then if you're going out to even like more remote facilities, like a lot of the installers don't understand common fencing. They throw up a chain link fence and they think they're good without understanding, you know, there's a certain level of protection based on the fence you install. The default is like chain link fence. Again, I go back to the DoD. I mean, they have actual like time ratings based on the height and type of fence, along with the top guards are installed. It is a single or double top guard or outrigger, what type of actual wire you're using with the outriggers. I mean, so there's an actual time rating assigned to not only the height of the fence, the type of the fence, the outriggers, the wire you're using with the outriggers. Is the fence actually submerged based on the type of soil? So maybe if it's a loose soil where you can actually tunnel under it, there's also time specifications based on that. But you're getting into a lot of the people who don't understand this. They just like, we'll throw up a fucking fence and we'll call it a day.
Right.
So it's common issues, but the part of it is just we're going back to this cookie cutter where we need to push stuff out quick, pre-COVID now.
Right.
So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens in a couple of years when we're all remote. But
yeah, I kind of want to go back to that. No,
I just went on a tangent.
No, but you know, the funny thing is you did, but it's a great tangent because it brought up this thing, right? You talk about like each one of these physical security controls adds time to a break-in, right? So the fence adds 5 minutes based on the rating, right? So configure it, DoD spec says this will buy you 5 minutes. This type of exterior lock, right? 60 seconds. This type of interior lock, this type of motion set, like all of these things start to add time to the attack vector. Is there a standard that we should be aiming for? We should say, hey, it should take you a minimum of 10 minutes to get here, or a minimum of, you know, 15 minutes to get to the data center. Like, is there a goal in mind?
Yeah, I mean, they're again based on the risk of what's actually in the facilities. I mean, based on the risk level or the risk rating is how you should be designing your physical security controls. So the whole risk kind of risk weighing, risk assessment. I mean, that was the thing that was always done. You know, back in the day, we're going back 20, 30 years, whenever customers were designing buildings to their specific need. But again, we're in a cookie cutter phase now where that doesn't happen anymore. And the whole risk assessment portion of it is like out the window. But there aren't physical security people anymore. There's facility facilities directors, and facilities directors have no concept. They're kind of leaning on the integrators they outsource, who are also most of the time not really physical security people. They resell crap, but they don't understand what they're reselling.
Right. No, that's a good point too. And you're right. We see these multi-tenant buildings going up, and there is no physical security advocate because they're transferring that risk to the building. And the building doesn't care, right? They're putting in stock sensors in stock locations, right? They're not putting security pins in on the door hinges. They're putting gaps wider than Canada in the between two glass doors. We come in with our our normal bag of tricks, and we're in 10 seconds.
Right. There's
no alarm. There's no forced open sensors. A lot of these kind of things that we used to have standard everywhere, we just don't have them anymore. So no, I think how do we, if it's you, right, if it's your company, your program, how are you getting emphasis, how are you getting buy-in from C-level executives to put security back on, or physical security back on the roadmap?
It's honestly exploitation. It's not only you can't, like, the typical way that a lot of them do it is they have just a walkthrough. Like, we'll walk through, we'll look at the stuff, we'll say, oh, this is bad, that's bad. But that's great as a start. And I stress, you have to have that as your foundation. Baby steps before you run, or crawl before you run, whatever.
Yeah.
But at least have that first phase where you're walking through, you're pointing out the potential issues. But there has to be testing. Like, the testing piece, even for the physical security program, it has to be there. And it's not something, again, that's not something ingrained into a lot of the physical security people or facilities people. There was never testing included as part of a lot of their training. So when they're going through whatever their as-is program, or they're going through, like, I went through EPI for a couple of their classes, but they never discuss testing. It's always, we design our programs to this, but we never test it. Which blows my mind, because if you start talking like Secret Service people, they're constantly testing their stuff. They're running their routes. They're constantly doing, like, vulnerability assessments on the program they've implemented. But when we get back to the private sector, it seems to have escaped how they do things in the public sector.
Right. It's kind of like that feedback loop, right? We have the design, implement, do test, all that good stuff, and then it comes back to test. It always comes back to test.
Right. We call it, obviously, in the cyber world, we call it continuous monitoring. It's just, you have to keep continuously not only testing it, but identifying gaps in the program, and then implementing new controls, and then you repeat the cycle.
Right.
But again, the physical security piece always seems to, like, fall out of that continuous monitoring process.
So, one of the last questions I have, right? How do I get buy-in, right? How do I approach my executive team and ask them, or start to incorporate? Because we have a lot of companies that do penetration testing, right? And we, even when we're doing our, pre-sales discussions with our clients, we talk to them about the different phases, right? Do you want external? Do you want phishing? Do you want wireless? Do you want, right? And we start to get all these pieces. We get to physical, and they're like, wow, you do that? That's it's almost like in some cases, it's a very unknown, or,
Yeah, it still is. We get even just like casual conversations.
What do you do for a living?
Right.
I get paid to break into places.
We've been here, we're here, and you just mention in passing, and people are just, like, blown away. It's like Mission Impossible stuff.
Right. They call you James Bond,
right.
007, right?
Yeah. So, as far as getting the buy-in, it's really, until you start going back to cyber, we're good at demonstrating potential impacts to business operations, how that's going to impact the bottom line. So, once we start demonstrating that there is an actual, by bypassing an egress, one of those egress sensors, getting into the building and actually demonstrating that there is going to be an impact, where that's going to be walking out with a bunch of freaking servers, walking out with a bunch of PHI that's been printed out on a piece of paper, or walking out, or just taking sticky notes and flapping it all over all the servers. This is a bomb.
Right.
Once you start demonstrating that the impact is there to actually damage the business and cause monetary loss or reputational loss, and that's the only way that's actually going to happen, as far as more recognition that the testing has to take place. But I think until that starts happening more, it's always going to be one of those unknown services that those niche companies out there do, which is unfortunate, because it's not a new thing. Going back to, like, Sony. That was in the news plastered all over the place. They Korea waved it in the face that they leveraged the physical security vector to get into Sony as part of the attack. So it's in the news all over the place. It's been for, Sony was 20 years ago, give or take.
At least. Right?
So it's why it's still, like, one of those things that has never really gained traction. It just blows my mind.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I don't know.
Yeah. What So funny. So what do you think? What's your favorite story, or like what's one of the funny, worth retelling stories of physical security? Everybody loves to hear the exploits. They love to hear what we did and how we did it, and there's always every tester has a great story.
So once upon a time, I actually had the name Keithcicle. So we were obviously not going into details. You were out trying to get into a satellite field in the middle of freaking nowhere. It was minus 25 degrees. It was a 4-mile hike in, 4-mile hike out. And it was snowing, so it added to it. So the snow is like up to our knees, and we were making this trek with my partner at the time, who was a former, force recon guy. So he was kind of insane. But yeah, we get out to the satellite field, and we go to climb over the fence, and I slip. And I'm actually hanging upside down on the barbed wire fence, and it was like I ripped my pants and blood's running down my leg, and we're laughing about it. And we had it on video. It was great. But anyways, go back to that one. It's like just weird crap that we do when we're doing this job, and it's just like it could be like death, but it's still amusing.
Yeah. You have those moments where you get super scared. Like I actually just did this one pretty recently. I was at a client that had multiple buildings on their property, and I was into the one building, and I stumbled into this room, and there was a cat, right? Like in the room, right? So mind you, I'm in a state, not home, right? Pretty far away, middle of the night, nobody in this building. It is quiet, and it is deathly quiet, and there's no movement, there's no anything, right? I'm looking at something on a computer screen, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see this thing move, and it. I'm like, Matt, you're seeing stuff. Just relax, you'll be fine. Don't freak out. And I look over, and it had gotten closer, right? And it was shadowy. It was still kind of in the dark corner of the room, and I'm looking. And I'm like, what is that? And it comes out of the shadows. It turns out to be a cat, but it doesn't stop me. I scream, I run away, right? Because instantaneous reaction. So it turns out, fast forward 15 minutes later, I leave that building, I'm in another building, right? And I'm walking down the hallway, and the phone starts ringing. It's the middle of the night. The office is pitch black, and the phone starts ringing. So I go over and I look at the caller ID on the phone, and it says security. I'm caught, right? I'm caught. I'm on camera somewhere, the cops are coming, like, this is gonna be a bad day, I'm gonna have to explain myself, not where I'm supposed to be. Nobody showed up, right? I got out of there, right? I thought I beat everybody. I ended up talking to the client a little bit later. As it turns out, the cat had stepped on the phone and dialed that office that I was walking past, and that caller ID on that phone says security. So this is, it's just the crazy stuff that we run into. It just cracks me up. But no, I appreciate you swinging by, chatting. I think we've still got a few more of these to put down in this good city. So, Keith, thanks for stopping by, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.